It was my 81st birthday. The day that, for most of my life, I had hoped would be filled with joy, love, and laughter. A day when I could bask in the warmth of family, reminisce about the years that had passed, and celebrate the little victories I had achieved along the way. But instead, it became the day I lost everything. I woke up that morning in the nursing home, just another ordinary day in what had become my new, and seemingly permanent, reality. The air was thick with the sterile smell of antiseptic, and the low hum of fluorescent lights filled the background. The room was stark, with pale white walls and a few pieces of old, mismatched furniture. The silence was deafening, broken only by the shuffle of nurses' feet, or the occasional murmur of a fellow resident, many of whom were far older than me, their memories fading and bodies frail. At 81, I wasn't in the best shape, but I wasn't entirely dependent on others either. I could still walk on my own, though a bit slower than I once had, and I still had the strength to make small decisions about my daily life. But that morning, I felt a kind of heaviness I hadn't felt before. The weight of abandonment. The weight of a life I had never imagined for myself. My family had placed me there. I hadn't asked for it, and I certainly hadn't wanted it. But there I was, separated from the life I had built, the home I had nurtured for over 50 years, and the memories I had spent decades creating with my late husband, George, and our children. A sudden and abrupt decision had been made for me, and it had shattered everything I had known about family, love, and trust. But let me back up a little, because my 81st birthday wasn't the start of this downward spiral. It was merely the day I realized the magnitude of what had been happening in my life. For years, I had been a strong, independent woman. My life hadn't been perfect, but it had been mine. I had raised my children, Clara, the eldest, and Tom, my youngest, with love and dedication, with a fierce commitment to giving them the best of everything I could offer. I had worked hard alongside George to build our home from the ground up, literally and figuratively. It wasn't just a house. It was our story. The walls held memories of every scraped knee, every birthday celebration, every argument, and every reconciliation. It was where we celebrated the births of our grandchildren, where we cried together through hard times, and where we grew older together. But as the years passed, things began to change. George's death had been the first blow. After his passing, I found myself living alone in a large house that felt emptier by the day. Clara and Tom grew up, went to college, married, and moved on with their lives. And slowly the phone calls became less frequent, the visits fewer. I tried to reach out, to stay close, but it was as if they were drifting further away from me with every passing year. I didn't want to admit it, but I was becoming a burden to them. I could see it in their eyes, hear it in their voices when they did come by. They no longer looked at me as the strong mother who had always been there for them. They saw me as someone in the way, someone they had to care for instead of someone they could turn to. The worst part was that they never actually told me what was going on. I wasn't blind to the changes. I saw the way Clara and Tom spoke to me, as though they were talking to a child, the way their patience grew thinner with each visit, the subtle comments about how difficult it was to manage their own families and work schedules while still trying to care for me. But instead of confronting me, they just pushed me further into the background, until I became a mere afterthought. I tried to fight it, to maintain my independence as long as I could. I refused to acknowledge the fact that I was getting older, that my health was slowly deteriorating, that I was no longer able to do everything I once did. I couldn't let go of the idea that I could still manage on my own. But, as is the case with life, things didn't happen on my terms. One day, Clara called me and said that they had found a place for me. She said it would be good for me, that I needed to be in a safe environment, closer to people my age. She said it with such finality, as though she had already made all the decisions for me. At first, I refused. I didn't want to leave my home. I didn't want to be placed in some sterile, cold institution with strangers. I wanted to stay in my house, the place I had loved for so many years. But Clara, in her calm, collected manner, told me that they were doing what was best for me. "Mum," she had said, "you're not taking care of yourself like you used to. We can't manage it anymore. We need to think about your future. It's time." It was the first time in my life I felt completely powerless. I had always been the one who made the decisions, the one who took charge. But now I was being pushed aside, as if I was no longer capable of taking care of myself. And so, on my 81st birthday, I was told I had to leave. I was taken away from my home, the place where my entire life had unfolded, and placed in a nursing home. As I lay in the nursing home bed that morning, staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't help but feel the deep sting of loneliness. Clara had barely even acknowledged it was my birthday when they arrived to collect me. There were no cards, no cake, no celebration of any kind. There was only a hurried rush to pack my things and get me out of the house. They didn't even let me say goodbye to the home that had been the cornerstone of my life. The house that had been the backdrop for every important moment, every milestone, every joyful occasion, and every sorrowful one. When I left, it felt like a part of me was being left behind. The house, the memories, the life I had built it, all faded as I drove away in the back seat of Clara's car, leaving behind the only place I had ever truly felt at home. I didn't know where I was going or what awaited me in that nursing home. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the worst thing happened. The very house I had been forced to leave, the place that was once filled with love, with laughter, was gone, burned to the ground, destroyed in an instant. The house, my life, my memories, they were all gone. And I was left in that nursing home, surrounded by strangers, with nothing but the emptiness of loss. Nothing but the hollow feeling that I had been abandoned by the very people I had given everything to. I had become invisible to them. And as I sat in that room, alone, I realized just how true that was. I was no longer a part of their lives. Day I turned 81, I felt as though I had been completely erased from the world I had known. But that wasn't the end of my story. Not by a long shot. The morning after I was placed in the nursing home, the weight of my new reality hit me harder than I could have imagined. I woke to the sound of a nurse's soft knock on the door, followed by her gentle entrance into my sterile room. She smiled at me, but it felt like a gesture performed out of duty, not affection. I had already learned that this place was not a home, not a sanctuary. It was an institution, a holding cell for the elderly, who had outlived their usefulness in the eyes of the world. That first day in the nursing home was filled with disorientation. I wandered through the long, empty halls, seeing other residents, slumped in their chairs, staring vacantly at the walls or asleep in beds. Some of them didn't even look up when I passed by. It was as if I was invisible to them, as invisible as I felt to my own family. I thought of my house, how it had once been filled with warmth, laughter, and the hustle and bustle of everyday life. But now that life was gone, and I was surrounded by the cold, unfeeling walls of the nursing home. Clara's decision had been swift. She had told me that they were doing what was best for me. But, as I sat alone in that room, surrounded by people who didn't even know my name, I couldn't help but feel betrayed. Had I really asked for this? Had I ever once asked for the comfort and the life I had spent years building to be stripped away from me like this? I tried to settle into my new routine. Meals were served at fixed times and I could barely bring myself to eat. The food tasted like cardboard, bland and tasteless. the kind of food you could imagine being served to a person who no longer mattered. I couldn't get used to the idea of being a resident in a nursing home, treated like an afterthought, like someone who had already lived out their life and was now just waiting for the end. But the loneliness was the hardest part. Clara had promised to visit regularly. She said she'd call often, but the days began to stretch into weeks and then months without a single phone call. Every time I reached for my phone, I expected her name to flash across the screen. But each time, I was left waiting for a call that never came. I began to wonder if they had truly forgotten about me, if they saw me as just another elderly woman who had outlived her usefulness. And then, one day, something happened that I could never have expected. The worst thing that could have possibly happened. It was early evening when the nurse handed me the phone. I had been staring out the window, watching the sunset when I heard her voice. I thought it was Clara, calling at last. But it wasn't. "Mom, you need to come home." Clara's voice was tight, frantic, as if she couldn't get the words out fast enough. My heart skipped a beat. My stomach churned. What had happened? Was there something wrong with the house? Had something happened to one of the children? What happened? I asked, my voice shaky with concern. "It's your house," she said. Her voice shaky with what I could tell was an unfamiliar mixture of guilt and fear. "It burned down. Last night. It's gone. Everything is gone." I felt the world drop out from beneath me. For a moment, I couldn't process what she was saying. I couldn't understand. My house? The one I had lived in for over 50 years? The place where George and I had raised our children? The house that had seen all the best and worst of our lives? Gone? How could that be? "It burned down," Clara repeated. And then I heard her voice falter. "The fire department says it was probably an electrical issue. They don't know exactly how it started. But it's gone, Mom. Everything." I felt like I was being suffocated. The walls of the nursing home seemed to close in on me. I was no longer sitting in a chair by the window. I was sinking into the bed, a lump in my throat that I couldn't swallow down. I was already overwhelmed by the loss of my independence. The fact that my family had forced me out of my home and placed me here. But now, the place where I had lived for so many years, the place where George had passed, where my children had grown up, was no more. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. The phone slipped from my hand, and I collapsed back against the pillows. My eyes blurred with tears, and I just lay there in silence, trying to grasp the reality of it all. I don't remember how long I stayed like that, just lying there, paralyzed by the overwhelming sense of loss. When I finally managed to sit up again, I felt numb. What had been the point of any of it? I had spent my life building that house, taking care of it, making it a home. But now it was gone, reduced to ashes in the blink of an eye. The worst part wasn't just the loss of my house, it was the realization that I had been forgotten. My family had stopped seeing me. Clara had made the decision for me, without consulting me, without asking how I felt. And now she was telling me that my home, the only thing left in the world that still held any meaning for me, was gone. Thought about George, about the years we had spent together in that house. I thought about all the birthdays, anniversaries, and quiet nights we had shared. And then, without warning, it was all taken away from me. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I felt like a stranger in my own life, someone who had been discarded. I had raised my children, worked hard for everything we had, and now I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a burden to be handled with indifference. When Clara came to visit me a few days later, she barely spoke of the fire. Her eyes were downcast, and her voice lacked any trace of emotion, as though she was ashamed to look me in the eye. "We filed the insurance claim," she said, her words flat. "You don't need to worry about that." But I wasn't worried about the insurance claim. What did money matter to me now? It couldn't replace what I had lost. It couldn't bring back the memories, the laughter, the life I had lived with George and our children in that house. What Clara didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that the house wasn't just a building to me. It was a symbol of everything I had given up for them, everything I had sacrificed. It was the place where my life had taken root, where every moment had been meaningful. And now it was gone, like everything else. And yet, Clara seemed so disconnected from the gravity of it all. She was already moving forward, making plans, organizing the next steps. I could feel her emotional distance growing even wider with each passing day. The nursing home was no longer just a physical prison for me. It had become a metaphor for how my family had placed me in a corner of their lives, not wanting to deal with the reality of their aging mother. It was as though they had wanted to forget me, to pretend that I no longer mattered. I spent the next few weeks in a daze. I tried to call Clara again, but the calls were short and impersonal. The visits, when they came, were filled with awkward silences. Clara seemed uncomfortable with me, and I couldn't understand why. I had given her everything, every sacrifice, every ounce of love, and now, it seemed, she had moved on without a second thought. I didn't know what hurt more, the fire that had destroyed my home, or the way my family had torn itself apart. I didn't know how to process it all, and I didn't know how to feel. The anger bubbled up in me, but it was quickly replaced by a hollow sadness. I was alone, completely alone. It was in that moment of isolation, amidst the overwhelming grief, that I made a decision. I couldn't let this be the end of my story. I had to rebuild. It wasn't just my house that was gone. It was my sense of self. But I would reclaim it. No one could take away my spirit. Not even my own family. And so, despite the sadness, despite the pain, I began to gather my strength. I didn't know how I would do it, but I would find a way to rise from the ashes, to find peace again. In the weeks that followed, I felt as if I were living in a haze of fog that clung to me as I tried to navigate my new, unfamiliar life. Every morning I awoke to the same sterile room, the same unfeeling walls, and the same endless emptiness. I still couldn't quite believe that the house was gone. That life, that comfort, that security, it had been wiped out in an instant. The house had been more than just four walls. It had been the anchor of my entire existence. Without it, I felt like a ship tossed about on the open sea, adrift with no direction, no purpose. And yet, amid the sorrow and the loss, a small, stubborn spark of defiance began to stir inside me. The fire may have taken my home, but it hadn't taken me. I was still here, and I was going to fight for the woman I had been, the woman I could still be. The days in the nursing home passed slowly, each one blending into the next. The nurses were kind, but they had their hands full with residents far older than I. Most of the people around me seemed lost in their own worlds, existing from one day to the next without real awareness of what was happening around them. Some of them had lived here for years, their families long since forgotten, their lives reduced to routines of meals, medications, and endless hours spent watching TV or staring out of windows. I didn't want to be like that. I didn't want to slip away into that anonymity. I wasn't just an old woman waiting to die. I was still a mother, a person with dreams, regrets, and a history that mattered. One evening, when the nursing home was quiet and the air was thick with the hum of the overhead lights, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let my family's neglect define me. I wasn't going to let my life end in this lonely, lifeless place. I called my daughter Clara. For the first time in weeks, I managed to pick up the phone and dial her number. It rang. a few times before she picked up. "Mum?" Her voice sounded as distant as it always had. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Clara," I said, my voice steady, though inside I was shaking. "I've been thinking about everything ... About the house, about my life, and about the way you've treated me." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. I wasn't sure what I expected her to say, but what I didn't expect was the defensive tone that followed. "Mum, we did what was best for you," she said, her voice tight, as if she was trying to convince herself more than me. "You're safe here. You need to understand that we couldn't take care of you anymore. It was too much." Her words stung, but I held my ground. "You didn't even ask me how I felt, Clara. You just decided for me. You took me out of my home, the place where I'd spent my life, and you didn't even care enough to involve me in the decision. And now my house is gone. Everything I had is gone, and you don't even seem to realize how much that hurts." I didn't know what to do," she admitted, her voice softer now, but still tinged with defensiveness. "I thought you'd be better off here. I didn't want you to be alone." "Alone?" I said, my voice rising despite myself. "I was never alone in my house, Clara. Not really. I had a life. I had a purpose. And now, you've taken that away from me. You've put me in a place where no one knows my name, and where I feel like nothing more than a problem to be solved. You didn't give me a choice." Silence hung in the air for a moment before Clara spoke again, but this time her tone was different, more vulnerable. "Mum, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I didn't think it through. I was just trying to make things easier. But I know now that I should have done better by you." Her words were a start, but it wasn't enough. I couldn't just forgive her right away, not after everything. I needed time. I needed to understand why she had made those decisions for me, why she thought it was okay to strip me of my autonomy, my dignity. But as I sat there in the quiet of the nursing home room, listening to the soft click of the phone against my ear, something shifted inside me. I realized that I couldn't keep waiting for Clara to fix things, or for my family to finally understand how much they had hurt me. I had spent my entire life giving, but somewhere along the way, I had forgotten to give to myself. It was time to take control of my own life again. I spent the following weeks doing something I hadn't done in years, thinking about what I wanted, not what my children or anyone else expected of me. I had always been the caretaker, the one who sacrificed her needs for the sake of others. But now, in the aftermath of all that had been taken from me, I realized that I deserved more. I deserved peace. I deserved happiness. I started small. I took walks around the nursing home grounds, something I hadn't done since I arrived. The fresh air, the feeling of the sun on my face, it felt good, as though I were reclaiming some small part of my independence. I began to read books again, books I had put away years ago, books that made me laugh or cry. I reconnected with old friends, reaching out through letters and phone calls. I began volunteering at the home, helping with activities, reading to the other residents, and slowly becoming part of something again. Something that was mine. I knew I wasn't going to find what I had lost: the house, my family, the life I once had, but I also knew I wasn't going to let it define me any longer. My life had changed, yes, but it hadn't ended. Then, one morning, I received a letter. It was from an attorney's office, informing me that the insurance claim for the fire had been processed. There was a check enclosed, a significant sum, more money than I had ever expected to receive. Clara had mentioned the insurance claim before, but I hadn't really thought about it. I had assumed that it was just a technicality, something to resolve on its own. But this was different. The money was real. For a moment I was stunned. I could use this money to start over if I wanted to. The insurance payout wasn't going to replace the memories, but it could give me the freedom to live on my own terms. It was a gift I hadn't expected. I thought about it for a few days, weighing my options. I could take the money and start over. But where would I go? The thought of living in another house, building yet another life, made me feel a bit uneasy. But then I remembered something George used to say. It's not the house that makes a home. It's the people inside. And that was the key. The house may have burned down, but the people inside it, the memories, the love, the lessons, those could never be destroyed. I wasn't going to let my past hold me hostage. I wasn't going to let it control me. I had the power to build something new, something that was entirely mine. I decided to use the money to fund my independence. I found a small apartment in the city, nothing grand, but just enough for me. I furnished it with simple pieces, things that made me feel at home: old pictures, the cozy armchair, bookshelves stacked high with books. It wasn't the grand house I had once dreamed of, but it was mine. And that was enough. I began to live my life again. I took trips to places I had always wanted to see, made new friends, and even started taking pottery classes. I found joy in the little things, in the new routine I was creating for myself. And through it all, I began to rebuild my relationship with Clara. Slowly, cautiously, we talked more, not just about the fire or the nursing home, but about our lives, about the things we had both missed. Clara came to visit me in my new apartment, and though things weren't perfect, I could see that she was trying. She was apologizing, and I was learning to forgive. My journey wasn't over, but I had learned one important thing. The fire might have taken my house, but it hadn't taken me. I still had the power to choose my own path, to create a life I was proud of, no matter how old I was or how much I had lost. And so, I moved forward, with hope, with strength, and with the knowledge that, no matter what life threw at me, I could rise from the ashes.